So Cyberfrog Bloodhoney just became the most successful comic on Indiegogo. I'm sure all the comic book websites will be talking about this. Any minute now. Any minute. So it looks like the comic press is going to ignore Ethan Van Sciver's super successful campaign because he's not one of them. I'm not at all surprised by this because there really wasn't anything that they could do. The campaign was funded within hours of launching, proving that there is a legitimate audience for this kind of book. But that's not really why they're ignoring this book or DNC's Jawbreakers. The real reason is because they got beat at their own game. The far left, progressives, SJWs, whatever you want to call them, are playing a game, and it's not the one that you think. BRET Weinstein actually broke this down recently, and since he's way smarter than me, I'll let him explain.
For the moment, what I want to do is suggest a kind of approach to understanding why this really is the left that is attacking some of us who all our lives would have called ourselves leftists. And the first thing I would suggest is that we may have a basic problem with the game theory of progressivism. It is quite possible that what is taking place is that the left has a bad actor problem that arises out of some of the fundamental assumptions of progressivism. And I don't mean to strike a negative note. I do think it is possible to structure a left that would be more or less immune to a bad actor problem. But what I'm witnessing in the present are bad actors that have control over the entire dialogue, and that is a very dangerous situation. The first thing that I recognized a bit before things went haywire at Evergreen, or at least went haywire publicly, was that the people I was talking to, and most of the population at Evergreen is pretty far left, but I recognized that there was a hidden dichotomy between two populations within the left. One of those populations earnestly wishes equality, and there can be some debate over what it is that is being equalized, but virtually everybody on the left would say that they are for equality of opportunity. Then there is another population that does not wish equality of opportunity. What it wishes to do is to turn the tables of oppression. And the problem for us is that when these two populations are intermingled, they sound alike until the point that you reach something like equality of opportunity, and we are nowhere near that point. At that point, they would clearly diverge, and you would discover that some of the people who had been pursuing some nominal version of equality were really about some radical version of inequity with new people at the head. And I do think that that's what we are facing. And the most confusing aspect of it is that the people who are earnestly seeking something like equality of opportunity are unaware that they have signed up with something unholy and un-American. One of the consequences of this dichotomy, the bad actors having taken control of the movement, is that they have begun to erect structures that lead a lot of people to sign up before they really know what it is that they're signing up for. So you'll find across the dialogue of the left at the moment, you'll find words that once upon a time had a definition that you might have struggled a little bit to resurrect it, but you could have figured out what words like equity probably meant. And those words have taken on very different meanings in the present. And they're actually part of a larger structure. So we have what I would call linguistic booby traps. We have policy proposals on college campuses and elsewhere that are actually Trojan horses that are described as pursuing one thing but actually serve a function other than the one that is on the title page. And then we have stigma that is playing an incentivizing role, or actually more correctly, a disincentivizing role. So people like myself who stand up against policy proposals that put my institution in jeopardy find ourselves faced with a social penalty for having done so. And it seems funny in my case. They came after me with the accusation that I was a racist, and then it turned out that there were a lot of people who could tell you that wasn't true, so it backfired on them a bit. But in fact, none of these stigmatizing concepts really depends on being accurate. The most important thing that they do is they isolate you. And that is a means to an end. These are not logical arguments that are being deployed. These are This is leverage that is being wielded against individuals that are considered troubling from the point of view of the movement. And I would argue that the best way to conceptualize what this movement really is to understand that we don't get to listen in on most of the actual dialogue that results in the structuring. What we listen in on is the public face of this movement. And the movement is really properly understood as an insurgency that privately has decided that it is entitled to disrupt the functioning of certain things that it regards as, quote unquote, problematic, and that once it has decided that you are problematic, there are no holds barred. If you recognize it as an insurgency and you stop listening to what it says it is attempting to accomplish, it will be much clearer what is taking place.
And that's what people forget about ideologues. It's not about the name calling. That's just a means to an end. It's a tactic. One of the reasons why it's so hard to fight against this is because people get tricked by the means of delivery. It's usually a person or a small group that uses the tactic, so people fixate on that, on getting that person or that tiny group back. What they really need to understand is that it's not really the person or the group they're dealing with, it's the ideology, and that ideology is a living, breathing thing. Howard Bloom talks about this in his book The Lucifer Principle. He's talking about memes, but the idea applies to movements. The meme is alive, and it uses people to spread itself the same way flowers use bees to spread their pollen. People are just tools for the ideology, and you have to keep that in mind when these folks start an attack. Now, how this ties back in with Ethan is that his book was a perfect counter to the SJW attack. See, when these folks attack, they go for things that are almost impossible to defend against. The idea is not just to turn everyone against you, but to also bog you down with defending yourself. Then you'll be too busy to stop their real goal, which is to take power and control. This is why they call people racist and sexist. Those labels are damn near impossible to block and even harder to remove. All it takes is for one person to put the idea out there, and it spreads. And it doesn't have to be true. Actually, it's better if it's not, because then it'll be easier to twist someone's defense against them. There's really only two ways to fight this. The first is to use the tactic against them. The reason the tactic works at all is because it's like the Zangief of arguments. It's unblockable. So even if they attack you, you're attacking them with the same thing, something that they can't defend themselves against. The trick is to find something that really gets under their skin and then hit them with it. This is why Trump drives the left nuts. He's insanely good at using their own tactics against them. They attack him, call him names, make fun of him, and then he comes back with Pocahontas or Build the Wall and shuts them down. He totally trolls them, feeding them lines he knows they'll take out of context, like his comments about MS-13, and lets the left make asses out of themselves as they argue about the humanity of vicious thugs. And then he uses that to keep hitting them. The downside is that he goes so low to do this that he looks terrible, but he tricks the left not only into following him down, but going lower, just so that they can say they're punching up. It's a pure con, and damn if he's not good at it. The second way to get around this tactic is to throw it in their faces. The best example I can think of this is male rape victims dealing with feminists. Feminists can't stand male victims because their very existence shuts down the feminist narrative. It's even worse if the rapist is a woman. Why? Because feminists claim that rape is a tool of the patriarchy, and that women have no power in the patriarchy. So basically, women can't commit rape because rape requires power. Or, if they can, then it only happened because a man made them do it. If there wasn't any man there forcing a woman to rape somebody, never fear, because the woman is probably a rape victim herself, and she's just acting out because of that, so it's still a man's fault. So how do you shut that idiotic argument down? You use the argument against them. One of my friends is brilliant at this. Take the idea of rape culture, the idea that because of patriarchy, we live in a society that ignores and condones and causes the rape of women, and only women. And because men are the creators of patriarchy, they benefit from the fear of and the actual commission of rape. But here's a problem. Men are raped too. So if we take this rape culture theory at face value, feminists are saying that men and boys who were raped caused and benefit from their own rapes. My boy would lay this out, actually walk feminists through the logic, using himself as an example since he's a victim of rape, and of course they would deny it. But they couldn't disprove it. They would say he didn't know what the theory really meant, so he'd ask for a definition, and they'd give it, and it'd be exactly what he said. Or then they'd come up with some other dodge. My personal favorite was the, well, that's not my definition argument. Oh sure, you've got a personal definition of a broad term that you're only going to bring up when you're losing an argument. The best part is that their personal definition was always something nonsensical, or just a reworded version of the regular definition. So, it'd go back to my boy's point. You're blaming him for his own abuse and saying he benefits from it because he's male. And they've got no counter to it because he's not wrong. In the end, it just makes feminists look like assholes, or bigger assholes. And that's basically what happened with Ethan and DNC's campaigns. They threw the SJW pros' arguments back at them by making books and getting them funded well beyond anything they asked for. They didn't just prove that they could make the books, they also proved that the so-called tiny minority has buying power and will support projects sight unseen. The attack wasn't blocked, but it was successfully dodged and countered. And like any douche who picks Street Fighter characters and spams their unblockable moves, the SJW pros didn't know what to do when someone learned how to jump over the attack or to stay out of reach. Now they're pouting and throwing down the controller because they got tagged with the super combo right as Zangief was landing. He's totally open, and now he can't block because you gotta wait for the animation cycle to end. Haha. Of course, there is a way for them to counter back, but we've already seen that doesn't work because the SJW books tank. Even when they have a lot of support, the creators end up screwing over their backers by delivering an inferior product, if they deliver it at all. The books from the publishers aren't doing much better. The books lose most of their audience within a month, and the only evidence that the books are successful are these digital and trade sale numbers that no company ever releases. So the only counter the SJW pros have, they've actually shut down themselves. This is why they're amping up with the rhetoric with outright bigotry and calls for violence. The ideology is putting out feelers. That's what happened with that guy who picked a fight with Ethan and literally tweeted himself out of a job all on his own. The key thing to remember is that even though the fear-mongering and mob tactics are dangerous, they're just a means to an end. Either roll with the punches and take the hit, or learn to dodge and counter. Or you can just make fun of them. Nothing is more effective than that, especially with the hypersensitive left. For added amusement, you can play it totally serious. Then they won't know what to make of you. But what do I know? I'm just some guy.